Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome back. So, now we will discuss what we have discussed so far after the imposition of tax by the government. Let me clarify again, it is unit tax, unit quantity tax. Okay. So, per unit of the quantity of the commodity which is taxed certain amount of money, okay, that is the tax we are discussing. Say suppose, okay, usual quantity demanded, quantity supplied, we are measuring in the horizontal axis, price in the vertical axis. Okay, this is the demand curve, this is the supply curve. Okay, and after the imposition of the tax, suppose before the imposition of the tax, this was the equilibrium, E was the equilibrium point, okay, and this was O Q star was the equilibrium quantity and O P star was the equilibrium price. Suppose after the imposition of the tax, this is the equilibrium OQ1 and two equilibrium prices, one is say P1 star or say maybe P S star, let us write S star, and this is P C star. Okay. Now, we are posing a question, right. Look, the price before the imposition of the tax, right, what customers were paying? Customers were paying O P star price pre-tax, right, before the tax imposition, and what sellers were getting? Exactly the same price per unit of the commodity, right. Now, after and this we told that the gap between, so this distance P S star and P C star, this gap, this distance is basically the tax amount, right, say tax per unit, that is the tax amount, right. If this tax is rupees 3 per unit, so this distance is basically rupees 3. Look at here in the vertical axis we are measuring price, no, in the monetary terms, price that much rupees per unit, like that, no, price. So, this distance is that 3 rupee or tax amount, right. One thing is clear that whatever price customers were paying pre-tax, okay, after the tax customers are not paying exactly tax amount more, okay. Exactly tax amount more means what I am telling. So, pre-tax they are paying this much, right. So, if this distance is the tax amount, this distance is little bit less, right, less than that, right, this distance. Actually, that is the increment in the price what customers are paying now. Earlier they were paying O P star amount, now they are paying O P C star amount, okay. That distance is less than the amount of tax what government is imposed, government imposed on that, on the commodity, right. So, the question is, and look at here, before the tax what seller was getting, right, this was this same price sellers were getting per unit of the commodity, right. After the tax sellers were getting actually this price O P S star, right. So, sellers also are not getting the exactly tax amount less, okay, little bit less than that. So, sellers are getting this much less, buyers are paying this much more and sellers are getting this much YOLO distance this much less after the tax. So, actually per unit what is the tax? That is the tax amount, that is the this distance, right, that is called wedge of the tax per unit, okay, the tax amount. Now, the question is government is imposing some 3 rupee or 4 rupee some amount of tax per unit, right. That tax unit or that amount of rupee actually is shared by both the party. Some portion customers are paying, some portions sellers are paying, okay. A fraction customers are paying, a fraction sellers are paying, okay. And when we are telling a fraction of wage of that tax or tax wage sellers are paying and remaining fraction customers are paying, right. So, all those fraction, that much sellers are paying, that much customers are paying, that much of what? Vis-a-vis what they were paying earlier. This fraction is only about the wage of the tax. 3 rupee, maybe 2 rupee customers are paying and 1 rupee sellers are paying, in that way, right. So, basically effectively, if sellers pay 2 rupee of this 3 rupee tax and buyers buyers pay say 1 rupee out of this 3 rupee tax, effectively buyers are paying 1 rupee extra than the price they were paying before the tax, and sellers are getting 2 rupee less than the price they were getting before the tax, right. That is the thing, right. Now, we are asking that questions, who will share what fraction of the wage, that is determined by what, okay. You understand, right. Say suppose let us take an phase diagram, okay. Okay. Suppose demand curve is very steeper, but supply curve is very flat, okay. This is the supply curve, this is the demand curve, okay. Now, government imposes some certain amount of tax, say 3 rupees 3 per unit. So, suppose up before the tax this was the equilibrium, and whatever equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity is quite easy to drop. This was the equilibrium quantity and this was the equilibrium price per unit of that quantity, right. Now, suppose after the tax, suppose this is the tax wage, right, that is this distance is basically the tax amount, say rupees T per unit. I am telling in general, not 5 rupee, 3 rupee like that, rupees T per unit, that is the tax in general, okay. So, this distance must be T rupee, okay. Look at here, when supply curves are supply curve is relatively flatter and demand curve is steeper, relatively larger fraction of the T rupees tax is actually paid by the customers and relatively smaller fraction is paid by the sellers, right. Alternatively, if you think that both the curves are more or less equally steep, suppose this is the demand curve, this is the supply curve, this is demand curve, this is supply curve, this is the tax wage, okay. Roughly sellers and buyers, they are paying roughly half of the tax. Another alternative possibility is that, say suppose demand curve is very flat, but supply curve is very steep, okay. This is the supply curve, this is the demand curve, this is the wage of the tax, right. Who is paying what? Look at here, sellers are paying larger share than the buyers, okay. This is the wage of the tax, a T amount, this is the T, right. So, we are getting a sense that who will pay what fraction of the total tax wage per unit, that depends on what is the nature of the demand curve and supply curve, right. More specifically, flat, and when we are telling nature here, all the 3 alternative diagrams what we have drawn, you look at, we are just changing the relative steepness or how much one curve is flat vis-a-vis the other curve, like that, right. And this steepness, flat, all these things related to the elasticity thing, relative elasticity, right. So, if demand for the commodity is more elastic, right, then demand curve will be flatter, okay. So, when demand curve is flatter like this, relatively elasticity is more, right, that time sellers will pay more because sellers supply curve is much more steeper, because and that is supply is much more steeper. Supply curve means what? Elasticity of supply, all elasticity what we are talking about, own price elasticity only, here own price elasticity of demand, here own price elasticity of supply only, right. So, own price elasticity of supply is small, okay, that is why supply curve is steeper. So, as a result, sellers are paying more share of the wage of the tax. So, lesson what we are getting is that depending on the corresponding elasticity factor, if corresponding elasticity, corresponding means if the elasticity of demand is less, customer has to pay more, if elasticity of supply is less, okay, so seller has to pay more, has to pay when we are telling has to pay more of what? More of the tax wage, how much the tax they will share among themselves. Okay. Now, let us try to understand what is the economic logic. Okay. So, elasticity of demand is less. What are the commodities for which elasticity of demand is less? That we have clarified earlier. The commodities which are necessary to us, to the customers, customers will not be having much luxury to cut down their demand much even if price increases very high, okay, because it's a necessary commodity, right. Say suppose food item, say rice, right, rice is our basic food item, suppose, okay. Now, rice price even if it increases very high, right, I do not have that much luxury to reduce the rice consumption to very less, if under the ceteris paribus condition, suppose not many substitute of the rice is available in the market, okay. So, I will try to cut down rice consumption, but not that much, because rice is an essential commodity or necessary commodity to me. So, when elasticity is less, that means elasticity of demand is less, it means alternatively we can tell customers are less price sensitive or customers price responsiveness is very less, right. If that is the case, when tax is imposed, price will increase, right. Since customers have less price sensitivity, because the commodity is a necessary commodity to them, they have no choice but to consume that commodity, okay. So, they can't cut down that much commodity, okay. So, as a result they will be forced to pay larger share of that tax. Exactly the opposite scenario when this is the case. When supply curve is very steeper, but demand curve is very flatter. So, demand curve is very flatter means what? Customers has much more price sensitivity, okay, towards the price of that product. Okay. So, if price increases little bit, customer can easily cut down their product to their consumption to larger extent. Okay. They are more price sensitive, okay, to that product. Okay. So, as a result what will happen? When due to increase of due to the imposition of the tax, price will increase in any case, right, customer will quickly adjust their behavior, cut down their product. This kind of high say absolute elasticity of demand value is greater than 1 for that commodity, elastic demand we told, right, and those are more the luxury commodities, right, the goods which are luxurious to us, we can, because those are not necessary to us, we are not forced to purchase that commodity, right. So, we have lot of flexibility whether to purchase or not to purchase depending on the price, right. So, when after the imposition of the tax price is going to increase, right, we can immediately cut down larger share of our consumption, okay, we can reduce huge amount of consumption, okay, because it is a luxury commodity to us, it is not a necessary or we are forced to consume that like that, okay. So, that way, so here since elasticity of demand is high, right, commodity is a luxury kind to the users or to the customers, right, customers could cut down their consumption to a larger extent, but supply is very steep. Elasticity of supply, own price elasticity of supply is very less, okay. Sellers say suppose this kind of commodity may be a perishable commodity, right, sellers can't store for long this commodity. If price falls, right, when the tax is imposed, right, price will increase for the customers, but seller will get less, no, because remaining thing will go to the government as tax, right. So, customer or sellers can't tolerate to keep that commodity idle for long or store or hoard that commodity for long, because it is a perishable commodity. So, they are forced to sell or they are forced to accept lower price in order to avoid the wastage of the commodity, right. So, that way out of this group of agents, sellers and buyers, whose elasticity of demand is less, they will be forced to pay larger share of the wage of the tax. Okay. Now let me discuss another thing related to this. Okay. Say suppose what we discuss, suppose demand curve is very steep. So, elasticity of demand, this absolute value is less than 1, it is more inelastic demand curve, but supply curve is very elastic. Say elasticity of supply absolute, and say absolute, or it is because it is positive, here we are taking absolute because it is negative, but it is positive. Okay, say suppose this is greater than 1, it is more elastic, right. So, customers will be forced to pay the larger share of the wage of the tax. Suppose this is the tax, this is the wage of the tax, that rupees T per unit. Okay. And look at here, this much actually out of that rupees T customers are paying, and only this very small amount sellers are paying of that tax, right, because elasticity of demand is very less, vis-a-vis relatively elasticity of supply is large. Alternatively, what we have already discussed, that we are summarizing. Alternatively, if say supply curve is very steep, so that means elasticity of supply is less than 1, okay, or not less than 1, very less in that way. Okay, that depends on, yeah, it since it has horizontal positive intercept, it is less than 1 only, we have discussed that, right. So, it is less than 1, but demand curve is much more flatter. Okay, so elasticity of demand relatively say suppose greater than 1, more elastic. Okay, elastic demand curve, in that way we are telling. So, suppose this is the wage of the tax. Look at here, out of that who is paying? This much sellers are paying, and only small amount customers are paying. Okay. And if this demand curve and supply curve are more or less equal steep kind of thing, this is the wage of the tax. Look at here, this much customers are paying, this much sellers are paying, roughly 50% kind of thing they are sharing, right. So, we understand that when commodity is necessary kind of commodity, customers has to, means necessary to the customers, they have to share the relatively larger fraction of the wage of the tax. Okay. Wage, W-E-D-G, wage of the tax. Okay. Alternatively, if the commodity is perishable to the producer, or commodity is the perishable in nature, so that producer can't store that for longer time. Okay. And as a result, elasticity of supply is inelastic supply curve producer face. Okay. They have to share relatively larger fraction of the wage of the tax, that larger message we got. Now, when this much of tax is imposed, okay, this much tax, okay, okay, let us go to the new sheet. We are discussing now one interesting political thing now. Okay. Price, demand curve, supply curve, this is the supply curve, this is the demand curve, and suppose this is the tax wage, right. So, that means earlier before the tax this much could be transacted in the market at say this price. After the tax this much will be transacted only in the market. Suppose this is Q star, this is say suppose Q1 star, OQ1 star amount of the commodity will be transacted in that market, right. Due to that much transaction, right, this is the per unit transaction of the commodity, the tax per unit transaction of the commodity government is getting. So, the question is how much tax revenue government is gaining? Definitely this much, this area, right, because this is the transaction amount after the tax in the market, and this is the tax per unit of transaction, right, that is the T per unit, rupees T per unit, right. So, definitely the area, this red color area, that is the total tax revenue government will get, that much money government will earn in terms of tax, right, by or through imposition of tax on this particular commodity, right. Now, it is quite obvious in the modern political system, if you see that most of the countries, certain countries are there maybe autocratic kind of thing or maybe semi-democratic kind of thing, not fully democratic, but most of the countries in the world these days, right, through some democratic mechanisms, through some election process, right, people who form the government, they come from some political party within that particular country, right. And when you are going to impose some tax, you being a government, okay, say suppose in India, okay, usually every government, we are talking about our central government, okay, usually form for 5 years, right, there is a general election, okay, and through that general election, and that general election different political parties contest, and through that general election the parties who win, they form, or the coalition, they form a government in center, right. So, all the political parties, what is their objective? Not only form the government today, they will be hoping to form the government tomorrow, day after tomorrow, like that, next 5 years, all things, right. And to form that, that is their objective. Any political parties target to do that, right, as much time they can win in the election, right. Winning the election is the major objective for any political party, right. Now, when a government today, okay, when we are deciding to tax a commodity, right, through taxation, since after the tax price will increase, definitely we will lose some popularity, right, people will be unhappy who are paying this tax. Okay, so the people say suppose this is for say this commodity, right, on which this tax, this amount of tax per unit of transaction we are imposing, that commodity say suppose cigarette, okay. So, this tax I may not be unhappy because I do not consume at all cigarette, right. So, whether tax is imposed on cigarette or tax does not is not imposed on cigarette, I do not care, right. So, there is no reason for me to be unhappy, but the people who are consumer of cigarette, they will be unhappy because of this imposition of the tax, price is going to increase, they have to pay more price, they will be unhappy, right. And when this political party has to face the election, right, those people are also some voter, no, they will also cast their vote, right. So, any government, because government is formed by some background political party, they have to be quite aware that how much popularity they are going to lose, right. By imposition of the tax, definitely they will lose some popularity, okay. So, what is the, when we are going to impose some tax as a government, what is the gain side? We have to, in any case we have to impose the tax on some commodity, because to run the government certain expenditure is required, right. To meet up that expenditure we have to raise that money through taxation, if not cigarette, this commodity, maybe some other commodity, maybe some other service, something like that, we have to impose some tax, right. And wherever we are going to impose the tax, consumer of that commodity or that service, they will be unhappy, right. So, any political party whose target is to win the election and form the government, its benefit side, in any case tax they have to impose, they can't avoid that, because to run the government they need some money, okay. Cost side, they have to lose some popularity. So, obviously, if I am a rational political party, my target is to lose as less popularity as possible, right. So, which commodity we should target to tax? Definitely, perhaps we should target that commodity which is not necessary, because we are getting an impression that if the commodity which we are choosing, that is necessary to the larger section of the people, then more and more larger people section of the commodity society will be unhappy, we may lose lot of popularity, right. So, we should target those commodities where the commodity is not necessary, right. Those commodities which are not necessary, perhaps luxurious kind of things, there we should impose the tax. That kind of apparent answer we are getting, but there is a dilemma here. Okay. What is the dilemma? Dilemma is there, if you impose the tax on say luxurious commodity, who will pay the tax? What is the luxurious commodity? Say yacht. Yacht, I think many of you know, it's a luxurious boat, usually very rich people, they may have this kind of personal yacht. Say Cristiano Ronaldo, you people know, you people heard about that, he is a Portuguese football player, okay, very rich, okay, and you will see that he has say maybe one or two personal yacht. So, this yacht usually that rich people, they used to make party or enjoy arrange party on yacht, maybe on the middle of the sea. Okay. So, now suppose government is targeting the luxurious commodities to impose the tax, because that kind of impression we are getting to lose or reduce the cost side of imposition of the tax, right. Now, what will happen? So, suppose government is targeting this yachts to be taxed. Since this is a luxury commodity, okay, the consumer of this product yacht, right, like this rich people, right, they can quickly switch their consumption pattern regarding that particular product which government is targeting to tax. So, what will happen if government impose high tax on yacht? Okay, perhaps Cristiano Ronaldo will not purchase an yacht. Okay, Cristiano Ronaldo will think to I am bringing Cristiano Ronaldo for a symbolic kind of thing, that kind of, the people who are the rich, who have huge amount of money to spend for some luxurious kind of enjoyment, right. They will quickly switch from this commodity consumption to something else, perhaps they will go for a vacation somewhere else, some other country, something like that, right, family vacation kind of thing, right. The problem is that although government is targeting this kind of commodity, okay, once the consumer of that commodity, they stop consumption that or they reduce consumption that, they can quickly reduce that, because by virtue of the nature of the commodity, it is a luxurious commodity to the consumer, right, who will actually face the heat of this tax. Yacht making factories, right, where the lot of poor people, lot of working class, right, who are getting employment in the yacht making industry, right, their demand for their product will come down, okay, and those people will lose job. So, actually the burden of this tax, although it is imposed on the luxurious commodity, and as a result, since luxurious commodity has a high elasticity of demand, okay, its demand will fall quickly, much more faster than the increment in price due to imposition of the tax, and since demand will fall, the people who are attached with the making of that product or producing of that product, they will get the actual pinch. Okay. That is the one side of the story. Another side of the story is that if this is the say demand curve and suppose this is the supply curve, right. In that case, if government impose say rupees 3 per unit tax, look at vertical distance, this is suppose rupees 3. Okay. So, government can get, because the reduction in the consumption after the imposition of the tax or reduction in the transaction, overall transaction in the market after the imposition of the tax, it will not fall that much. Although a large number of people will get the pinch, because this commodity is necessary to the society or major member of the society, okay. Many people will get the pinch, but all of them will get less pinch. That pinch will be distributed, because it will not cut down that much. Okay. As a result, this thing government revenue will be considerable amount or considerable quantity of the revenue, because government needs money. No, it is not that I am imposing or government is imposing 10 rupees tax per unit. only 3 rupees, but with that 3 rupees suppose we need some amount of money we are targeting, right. Alternatively, suppose this is the demand curve, this is the supply curve, both are little bit flatter, same 3 rupee tax, because now 3 rupee distance is this, you will see that large amount of shortfall in the transaction after the tax. Okay. So, as a result, this distance 3 rupee here, here also 3 rupee, but by virtue of the thing this is more, this distance is say this distance means this green color distance is less than this say blue color distance, because it is not falling that much, it is falling larger extent, right. So, in this particular case, when government is imposing the tax on the relatively luxurious commodity, amount of tax what revenue, total tax revenue, tax amount of money what government will get in terms of tax, right, that amount of money will be less here than here. Can you follow? Let me repeat why it will be less here than here, because the distance, vertical distance is the same amount tax unit. Earlier suppose this was the initial equilibrium before tax, this is say 100 unit, this was the 100 unit. Okay. Now, when government is targeting tax on a necessary commodity, by virtue of the commodity is necessary to the customers, the reduction in the transaction is not falling that much. Suppose this transaction is falling only 20 units. So, this is 80 units. But by virtue of when government alternatively imposing the tax here, by virtue of the commodity being a luxurious commodity to the customers, right, this transaction falls much more than here. So, suppose this is 60 units, 40 units it is falling. So, total tax revenue what government will get, it will be 60 into 3 that much rupees in this case, vis-a-vis in this case it is 80 into 3 that much rupees, because after the imposition of the tax, whatever the amount of transaction per unit of that transaction government will get 3 rupees. So, definitely 80 into 3 that much total money government will get as tax, in this case government will get 60 into 3. So, same amount of tax you are imposing, if you impose on necessary commodities you will get more tax revenue. So, that is the positive side or gaining side of the imposition of the tax, because target is the revenue to get some income through tax, right, and negative side is that you have to lose the popularity. Okay. So, government, any government in any country has to make a balance. So, what is the dilemma? I hope that everybody can understand. Apparently, losing the popularity, that point of view, if we pose the question, perhaps we are getting the answer that government should target luxurious commodity. If government target luxurious commodity, it has two limitations. One, yes, the people who are consuming that commodity, they will quickly switch product or stop production or stop consumption of that commodity. Okay. As a result, people who are attached with the production of that commodity, they will be get the pinch of the tax or burden of the tax. They have to bear their salary or their job will be, they will be losing their job and so on. Okay. Alternatively, that is the one side of the story. Another side of the story is that government will not be able to generate that much of amount of money through the tax. Here, yes, perhaps government will lose more popularity in the sense, because lot of people are involved, they are the customer of this product by virtue of the fact that product is necessary in nature to the customers. Okay. That is the one side, but other side is that government can generate more money. Okay. So, one positive side is there, one negative side is there. Okay. So, if we consider only negative side, okay, apparent answer we are getting that government should target the luxurious commodity to be taxed. If we consider only the positive side, we are getting that government, positive side means more tax revenue, how government can gain, we are getting the answer that government should target the necessary commodity. Okay. But both have the drawbacks or both have the limitations on the popularity, on have the bearing the possibility of the same people to form the government in the next election as well, after the next election as well. Okay. So, any government has to take up balance in between. Okay. Let us stop here, okay, and we will discuss or we will after start the next chapter, chapter number 7 in the next class. Okay. Let us stop here today.